Hi everyone, it's your friend Doris, Thecoder, back with another video. And if you're new to my channel, welcome. And if you've come back, thank you for coming back. In today's video, I am going to talk about how you can improve and make more efficient your audits. So there's different audits and monitoring that you might do within your organization. I'm going to hyperlink the first video I did on audits because it was actually kind of popular. So I think this is a step 2 or a part 2 to that that's a little more advanced. Now, if you don't have a really sophisticated auditing software, I am a very thrifty coder consultant person overall. So you don't have to spend a great deal of money in creating these purchasing these systems, or you might be a smaller practice that really just doesn't have the resource to do that. So what do? There are ways for you to create them yourself. So I am going to give you in this video 6 steps in how to efficiently perform audits. So the old way is access, and again, I'm going to include that video. This one, level up, we're going to talk about the form access and how you can use both. So 6 steps I'm going to give you. Step 1, surveying. Step 2 is going to be researching. Step 3 will be setup. Step 4 is compiling. Step 5 is analyzing, and our final step is reporting. An audit serves no purpose if no one knows what the findings are. So surveying is something you may or may not have to do based on the scope of the audit you're performing. If you're doing an internal audit, for example, as an auditor, I audit for practices, but I make it part of my practice to also audit my team. So there's an auditor on our team, and I audit my auditor because it's easier for me to audit one person than have to audit multiple people. So my auditor audits the team, and I, will audit the auditor. For something like that, it's internal. I don't need to do a survey because I know it's internal. I know my practice. I know my protocols. I know there's no additional research. But if I'm doing an external audit and I have a client say, we'd like an audit, we need an audit, I have to do a survey. One, I don't know the client often, so I have to figure out who they are, what's their practice, what are their areas of concern, right? And maybe I'll do a video on that, on some questions you want to ask yourself if you're doing external audits. So I have to find out what are their needs, what are their goals, who are they, and what risk areas they may have. So that's the step 1 of survey. Step 2 is research. So if I'm doing an external audit, I've got to find out what their risks are. So if I know who their payer mix is, then I have to start with, are they aware of how they should be doing things? Every organization doesn't have policies on how they should do it. And sometimes the coders don't have benefits, or the billing team, whoever's doing it, either have no knowledge of policies that exist that pertain to the claims that they're reporting, or they don't have time to access. There's no written policy to direct them, no billing protocols for them to know, oh, I have to do this way for this payer. So it's important to do the research phase. If you are doing external auditing like I do, you won't need to do it for internal auditing from a research standpoint because you're probably auditing to something already. Step 3 is setup, and that's where I'm going to go deeper into step 3. Setup. So I showed you how you can use Excel, right? And I've used Excel 100 times when it comes to audits because I know Excel, it's faster, it's easier. I actually have a person on my team that builds sheets for me. I also have contractors that I work with to build sheets based on the scope of audit that I'm doing. If I know I've got a big one and I'm not going to be able to do it on Excel because it's just too many fields and I'm scrolling over and scrolling back and trying to freeze cells and all of that, that gets annoying for me. I like something as a form format, like what you see here. So this is one example of the forms. For one that's recurring, this is another example of a form, right? And maybe, one of these if I'm doing something targeted that's E&M. So one of the questions I get is, what do I look for in an audit? How do you track it? This is why the setup is important, because if I'm simply just saying it's right or it's wrong, I may not be able to give granularity. When I do E&M audits, for example, I want to say if I'm doing E&M auditing, instead of just saying it's coded incorrectly, I want to say they're overcoding or they're undercoding. It's either correct or it's undercoded or overcoded because maybe you have a revenue risk or a compliance risk, right? So I want to have that granularity as I audit, and I can build some of that into my sheets. The setup part reminds me of what to look at every time. Because what you'll do when you start an audit and you go forward, you're like, wait, I just found something. Did that happen in another record too? Did I catch that? I wonder if this is the first time it happened or the first time I noticed it. So the planning part of the audit with the setup, the surveying, and the research is really important because it helps you set up where you're going to start, right? Like these are all the things I'm looking at based on what we're trying to accomplish with the audit. And access is great because there are some fields that are recurring. Like I have a client who called it the claim or encounter number. I had a client who called it an invoice number on their system, and bill number. It's all these different names or synonyms that basically mean the claim date, right? This date of service number that's unique to the date of service, not just the patient. So that patient has a medical record number. That's a field that goes across all my sheets, but the number that's reflective of a specific date of service and unique to that is called different things. So if I can get a client list or an Excel report that has some of that data on it, I can program my access to save me rekeying and dump that data, but it has to match. So if this client calls it invoice number, but another client calls it encounter number, and another client calls it claim number, in order for them to communicate with each other, the planning part and setup I have to do is I have to call it whatever I want it to be on the Excel sheet for it to marry. So I either have to change it on the Excel sheet to what matches my audit sheet, or I have to change it on my audit sheet in Access to match what it is on the Excel sheet. And then I don't have to key some of these fields all over again because they'll dump directly into my report. And then all I have to do is the parts that didn't cross into that immediately. So maybe I have to free text CPT, maybe not if the report formatted all of that there for me. So it's really interesting, and it's great to be able to plan out your sheet and do your setup because Excel and Access work together frontward and backward. So the Access is great because when you have a lot of audits or a really long audit that is longer than what you want in Excel, it's helpful to me to have this in an Excel format, right? Or in a form format, because I can just go line to line. I can see everything at a glance. If not, I would have like 20 columns across my Excel sheet, and scrolling that becomes extremely cumbersome and really just not comfortable on my eyes. The form format, you know, I'm visually challenged a little bit, so the form format is not the best. Once you do those steps, so again, step 1 is survey, step 2 is your research, step 3 is your setup. You decide what fields you want on your sheet to remind you as you start auditing. Then you can do the compiling phase. That's where you start filling in your sheets and auditing your records and capturing your data. Once your data is captured, you move to your fifth phase, the analyzing phase. So Access is great for compiling. It's great for setting up. It's even great for, research in some regard, because this is a tool, one of the tools I had, where I can take a snip of the record and put it here. So if I can look at the record and see where the error is, instead of me having to go back into the record, I can snip that piece and paste it right into this record. So that's really great from an Access standpoint. But when I get to the point where I'm analyzing my data, I don't find Access to be very, very helpful. But remember what I said, it works forward and backwards with Excel. So I can dump data into it from Excel, and then when I get all of this data keyed and finished, I can export it from Access and put it in Excel. That's where I get into the analyzing phase, where I start to get my numbers and say, well, how many records were correctly coded? What kind of procedures were they? Who were the payers? What's the error rate, right? And do some of my analytics on my data that'll lead to my final step, step 6, which is reporting. Now, let me prepare something for the client so they know, okay, we looked at, 100 records or 500 records, and we find that your quality results, as far as our agreement rate with you, was 72%. And of the 28% that was in error, you had the tendency to overcode, right? Based on what the documentation supported. So you have more of a compliance risk than a revenue risk. That's not always the same. Sometimes I find more of a revenue risk than a compliance risk. So having these different things, it actually changes what I audit based on the scope. And that's why when I'm asked, well, what's a baseline audit? You can set some things, of course, but that can be drastically shifted from a client perspective. So having a team member who can actually build those sheets for you is really very helpful. I'm going to include, if you need someone to build sheets, I'll actually put one of my contacts in the description box who can actually build some of those sheets for you. Access can be very intelligent, very intuitive, and make your life much easier if you know the programming for it. I'm one of those folks that I'm like, I may not have the gift, but if I know somebody who has the gift, it's a gift to me as well. So I use that. I'll reach out to people and say, hey, can you do this? Can you figure it out? Because I couldn't figure this part out. And I need your help. So I don't have to know everything. So this is just one of the ways you can kind of level up if you're doing baseline audits, that same setup and thought process that you thought about before in the Excel to create those lists. You can do that in Access. In fact, instead of that, if you get a report for the client, you can use that report as the base for your list. So if it's dumping some of that data in it, you're not as worried about it when you don't have to key it. You can still analyze and report on it. And when you get to the analyzing of the data, you should also be cleaning your data in that phase to maybe condense down or compress some of your findings. You'll be able to better report on it and see a clearer picture of what's going on. So I hope you found this video helpful. I'm your friend Doris the Coder, and whether you're doing internal audits for yourself or monitoring to your current policies or another payer's policy, I hope you found this video helpful and hopefully you can use some tools. I'm your friend Doris the Coder signing out, and until the next video, I'll see you then.